So before the podcast begins, I just want to quickly preface it by saying that the reason as to why we haven't been uploading any podcasts over the past few days is because we didn't want it to take away from the Black Lives Matter movement. We realized how important it is for people to stay educated and informed on the subject, and we didn't want this podcast to take away from any of that. While this podcast that you guys are about to see doesn't really discuss the Black Lives Matter movement because it was filmed way before any of this went down, we just want to say that we have linked a bunch of websites and pages where you guys can learn more about it or donate or even sign some petitions. And in future episodes, we are going to be talking about a lot of these issues and our viewpoints and opinions on the subject. But nevertheless, this podcast was one of our favorite ones. We got to interview Mark Rampolla, he's the CEO of Zico Coconut Water, and it's really awesome. So I hope you guys enjoy. Hello, friends and family from near and far. Welcome to the ADIOS SENOR podcast. I'm your host, Alex Dempsey, and today I'm joined with my co-pilot,
Jake Wild, and today we have maybe our most exciting guest yet.
Yeah, really.
We have the former CEO and founder of Zico Beverages, founder of Power Plant Ventures, growth and equity fund that invests in food and beverage companies, and we have an author here as well who wrote his own novel, High Hanging Fruit. And so we are very excited to have Mark Rampolla here tonight on our podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you've done so much in terms of like writing and founding businesses, and you own your own fund. You know, could you tell us a little bit about your background, like where you grew up, what your family life was like?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. And so I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in working class community Baldwin, youngest of 6 kids, and really great, very loving family, and close in a lot of ways, but a pretty rough and tumble neighborhood. You had to stand up for yourself. And as a youngest of 6, if I wanted to get some respect and kind of find my way in the world, I had to find my own way in the world. And my parents were kind of done after raising the 5 other ones, so they kind of let me do my thing.
So what affected that community and your parents? I mean, you said that they were kind of done after raising the other ones, but what affected your community have on kind of like your leadership skills and your motivation and trying to get ahead?
That's a great question. Look, I think it certainly planted some seeds, and I would say, interestingly, when I was growing up, I was born in '69, so grew up in the early '70s, there was, at the time I was really little, a steel worker in the neighborhood made more money than my dad, who was a nuclear physicist.
Wow.
It didn't matter. Nobody cared. Like, it just didn't matter whether he had money or didn't have money. Nobody had money, really, but nobody was also dirt poor. And so I really never grew up with any association between, money and happiness. But I do recall really the only business person I knew in my sort of family circle of friends was a guy that was a salesperson for Maxwell House Coffee, if you've even heard of that brand.
Yeah, for sure.
Or like the, Western Pennsylvania territory or something like that. This guy just had was a jovial, sales-oriented type guy, and I just remember that being an influence on me in a way. But really, up until I got into college, I thought I was going to do physical therapy. I was an athlete in high school. I had a couple injuries, and I remember going to physical therapist, and I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was interesting. The guy, physical therapist, had a very attractive daughter that was at the time working in the office, so it gave me an extra reason to want to go back regularly. And I just thought that seemed pretty cool. So I intended to go to college for physical therapy, but decided to go into business. And and really, but even at that point, I don't think I just had much of a sense of, other than, lived a pretty happy, fun life in high school and never really thought about much more than that.
Right. Was there kind of a moment in college where you decided, okay, this is like, I want to go more down the business track, or did it come to you more gradually?
I'd say gradually. I frankly was conflicted. I grew up in a household that was very liberal politically speaking, and progressive. My parents were Catholic and very activist Catholic, and so much so that I remember my dad regularly picking up homeless people, bringing them to our house for dinner.
Wow, that's awesome.
My parents brought in a teenage girl that was pregnant, had got kicked out of her home, that lived with us for a while. When I was away a couple of years later, my parents basically adopted a Bosnian refugee family.
Wow.
So they sort of raised us all with this sense of social and moral obligation. And I went to a college, Marquette, that's a Jesuit college that really sort of has those values. But at the same time, I was just fascinated by business. And a lot of the guys I met my freshman year were from business families, or families had small businesses, mainly in the Midwest and Wisconsin and Chicago. And I was just fascinated by that, hearing them talk to their parents about business. Sometimes I went and visited them, and that really had an influence on me. But at the same time, I still had this conflict about, can you make a lot of money and do it ethically? Is it, where do I fit into that world? So I was pretty conflicted for a number of years.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So like, you went to college, right? And everyone at college, we're about to go to college this fall.
Yeah.
So was there any like big takeaways that you took, like getting to know all these different types of people? You mentioned that you got to know a lot of people whose families own business. Like, what were the takeaways that you took going to college that helped you along the road when you built your own company?
Yeah, look, I think when I look back on it, it's a great time to experiment. It's a great time to learn. I took a lot of different classes. I think I was trying to, find my voice. I would encourage people to explore, feel no need to make a commitment. I've got a daughter's, I guess, a year older and year younger than you guys, a daughter that's a freshman in college and one that's a junior in high school. And, my encouragement to them is have fun, enjoy, study, learn. You don't have to make any big decisions about your life. They'll come to you soon enough, but the relationships really matter. It's okay to be choiceful. It's okay to, make some choices about who you spend some time with. But, I think you're going to probably build some relationships that, you may have for the rest of your life, and will be from some different people. Hopefully you go spend some time with them, see the way they live, understand, the way they operate, their families operate. All that just becomes things to absorb that I do think definitely had an effect on my life.
Definitely. So what was, after leaving college, did you kind of have an idea of where you wanted to go, or like what was your first step after college?
Yeah, so I took a little bit of an unconventional track. I had to pay for part of my schooling, and so I had to work, and I wound up fortunately getting a pretty good paying job at IBM back in the day when just doing some kind of generic stuff around the office at a local sales office in Milwaukee. But it was a pretty good paying job, and I wound up working a couple summers and then some hours during school. And so when I was getting gearing up for graduation, I probably could have gotten to work for them. But I'll tell you, I was not a great student, and I had one mistake I can look back on is I partied a little too hard my freshman and sophomore year.
Yeah.
And it took me, I had to bust my rear to get back on track by junior and senior year. But I just didn't have the grades to get a lot of the good jobs. I had friends that were going into finance or accounting or consulting or banking. I was not getting those jobs. And believe it or not, I had zero foresight on the tech revolution. At IBM, part of my role was dealing with these little software companies out of somewhere called Silicon Valley that were trying to write software to work on IBM platforms to sell to their customers. So I was working with a lot of these guys. I don't know if any of them turned into anything, but it just didn't resonate with me as like this is the next big thing, right? So that didn't pay attention. It didn't strike me. But I remember I was very conflicted on what to do. It wasn't like I was getting job offers left and right. And then I remember walking through a career fair and seeing these big booths for big companies and consulting firms and the like. And I see this teeny little table with a Peace Corps sign on it. And I remember being kind of always curious about that and wondered about that. So I stopped by and I remember asking the woman that was there, you wouldn't happen to have small business any sort of business programs? And she said, well, actually we do. We've just been kicking off these business programs. Take some information. And I looked at that and thought about that and talked with friends and family about that and wound up trying to go for that. And I'll never forget, I think most of my friends thought I was an idiot. I had a good job at IBM, I was making money, I could have kept that, and they're like, you're gonna go do what?
Yeah.
And one of my best friends got it. And he's like, man, God, that's you. It makes total sense. I had never been out of the country. I didn't speak any of the languages, but he knew I had this kind of adventurous spirit. And so he was supportive. And then also one of my mentors at my job, a guy that very senior guy in the small little office of IBM, he got it as well. And I remember, just all it took was those two people saying, hey, Mark, go for it. And so I joined the Peace Corps. So I was did small business development and early environmental sustainability projects in Central America for 2 years, and had one of the best experiences of my life.
Yeah, what was life like there? Like, what was your lifestyle, a day in the life in Central America?
And well, day in the life was, first of all, I did a 3-month training program, a whole group does, where I live with a family. So I moved back into, a small bedroom, a little single bed. I'm like back home again, right? Yeah. That was kind of weird, but a good way to learn the language and culture. But then when I was living on my own, I made $200 a month, which was enough to get by. And it was probably equivalent to minimum wage. So, I definitely didn't live high on the hog, but I had my own teeny little house. My house would probably fit in my little my office right now. And I would go to a little cooperative. It's like a teeny little farming bank.
Yeah.
Then I would go out in the field and, visit these predominantly women entrepreneurs and try to help them. Meanwhile, I didn't really know anything about entrepreneurship or a lot about business at that time. Yeah. But, part of the objective of Peace Corps is, be useful in the community. So I lived in a pretty small town. So I realized that they had no gym teacher. So I became the gym teacher. And so I spent my days riding my bike up from the little, poor part of the town into the main town, working, get to go with some friends, have a couple beers at the end of the day. It was a pretty good life. It was challenging to, I was pretty much one of the only Americans in this town and, trying to figure out how to fit in. I definitely went through a little period of depression, but got through that and made some great friends in the Peace Corps that I have to this day as well.
That's awesome. So, it seems that you spent a lot of your time spending or teaching others in your community in Latin America. So would you say that there's any specific lesson that you learned from those people that you taught?
Yeah, I would say it's, how to just live in life with little, that I think it's, I look at my life now and I have an amazing life and I absolutely love it. But am I really any happier than when I made $200 a month as a Peace Corps volunteer?
Right.
Not really. I was pretty happy then. And there's a simplicity to a simpler life. It's hard to figure out how to integrate that into this crazy world we live in. But I think it's just a reminder that you can always live a simple life if you choose. And for me, having that in my back pocket is liberating, because what I know is come hell or high water, if I lost everything, my house, every business, the fun, all the money I've ever made, my wife and I even joke like, screw it, we'll go back to Central America, start again, get a little place, get some jobs, we'll figure it out, and it's just amazingly liberating to know you can figure it out and live a good life no matter what.
That's awesome.
Definitely. So was the next step right after, or I'll phrase it this way, what was the next step after you left the Peace Corps? Like what were you thinking about where you were going to go in your life then?
Sure. I was still, I'd say, frankly, conflicted, a little ambivalent about what I wanted to, very ambivalent about what I wanted to do. But when I look back, I can see the beginnings of this coalescing of sort of a life plan, of a life strategy. And so I still became very interested in environmental issues, sort of understanding early on, work that was needed to be done, being done to, preserve the rainforest at the time. People were just beginning to talk about global warming and, the relationship with carbon emissions. So I was very interested in that arena, but I love business, and I was intrigued by that. I was motivated by financial success and kind of wanted to get on a certain path that way. So I decided to try to go to business school. Again, I did not have the best grades, and that, I knew that was going to be a challenge. But frankly, I think the Peace Corps did me a big service. At that time, in particular, it was a real differentiator and something that kind of, I think, gave me a little bit of a leg up. But I was very particular. I wanted to do a joint MBA in environmental management program.
Yeah. And
at the time, there were only 3 schools in the country that had that. It was Michigan, Yale, and Duke. And I had been a Duke basketball fanatic from the time I was a kid. I had never could have gotten into there as an undergrad, but I figured, hey, let me give it a shot. And I only had enough money for 1 application.
Wow.
Getting it done and mailing it from Central America was expensive. So I rolled the dice and went for Duke. And I applied to that joint program. And when I got in, I decided, hey, that's where I'm going. So I went straight from the Peace Corps to Duke. I started in what was then called the School of the Environment and did a year in that program. And then from there forward, did joint MBA environmental program.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Was there, were there different, like after leaving Duke, did you have kind of a more clear vision of where you wanted to go?
Not really. Look, fellas, let me bring you in on a secret. I, like a lot of people, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. Okay, yeah. So it's just a process. Eventually, you just accept that it's not that it always becomes clearer. It's just you worry a little bit less about it.
Right.
But it became a little more clear. So I found myself in a similar situation where I was interviewing. I'll never forget interviewing with, I do forget what the company was, but it was a big, it wasn't, but it would have been like a 3M or something. One of these big corporations hired a lot of MBAs. And I'm interviewing with the guy. And I had a bunch of interviews with different companies. And I remember the guy looking at me and was absolutely dead serious, Peace Corps, why on earth would you do that? And I knew he wasn't just probing, I just had that sense. And I finally got up the confidence to say, you know what, if you need to ask, this isn't going to be a good fit for me. So thank you very much for your time. And I walked out. From then, because at that time, up until that time, I was always uncertain. How do I frame that? How do I talk about that? Where does it fit on my resume? And then I just got comfortable. Man, this is me. And this is who I am. This is my past. This is very much aligned with my values. Somebody's going to figure that, be cool with that, or they're not. And then, I found a company. What I first lesson I realized is I'm not going to rely on, the career department to find my job. They do a great job. I have nothing against them, but they're great for finding for banking or finance or consulting or, tech probably now, or big consumer products companies. And I just realized I wanted to find my own path. And I did not have an entrepreneurial bug at that time. I still thought it was weird, to be honest. Like, I remember a couple of my friends in the entrepreneurship program back then. It's not that long ago, but I'm telling you, in the big MBA programs, it just was odd. There was a teeny little group of entrepreneurs over there. I didn't make sense. I thought that business was corporations. I just assumed that was the case. I have a very different view of the world today. But right. So I thought, look, but I did first. What I realized during my MBA program was I was never going to be the best at ops or finance or marketing or any of the specialties, special functions. There were always people better than me. But I realized I liked them all. And I remember kind of joking around with somebody like, well, what do you do when you're kind of good and interested in everything, but you're not an expert in any of it? And I realized, you're the boss. Right. So I decided I want to get on that path. And so I began to look for companies that I felt like I would get a shot at running a business as quickly as possible. And what I realized was at Coke or General Mills or Ford or Citibank, there's no way. It's 20 years until you truly have P&L, profit and loss responsibility, or really running a business. And I didn't want to wait that long. And I also, frankly, wasn't sure I could compete with all the people that were going to be, graduating from top MBA programs around the world. So I wound up, and I was very interested in the world of forestry from my environmental studies. And I wound up, coming across a company called International Paper. It's a global forest products and paper conglomerate. Yeah, people know the name, but it's definitely not the sexiest company in the world. At the time, I think they recruited like one MBA a year.
Wow.
And there was one guy a year or two ahead of me from Harvard that was there. And he was moving on to go take a general management assignment in Latin America. And I happened to meet a guy that was on the board of Duke that, I was on an exchange in Europe. I happened to go track him down, but I pursued that company and wound up, getting an interview, going through the process and getting a job there. And so moved to Memphis for a couple of years and, launched my career in paper and packaging.
Yeah. Were there lessons, of course, I guess, learned from that told you that, again, like, you were meant to be the boss and you were meant to be running your own company and keep going with that entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah. And again, I'd say even at that point, I never would have called it an entrepreneurial spirit. Like I originally, what I thought is I'm gonna learn, kind of from the inside out how, a corporation like International Paper works. I did understand then that if I wanted to make a difference, and I still did, and at the time it was very much in the environmental arena, I quickly realized in talking to some, very senior people that the only way to make a difference really in a business like that is you got to know how it runs. You got to know how it makes money. You got to know, frankly, how to make money for the business in order to change the way it makes money. And so I still was on a trajectory to get general management experience and to, kind of prove my chops in the pure business world. I didn't want to be only, a do-good, Peace Corps environmentalist. I still have that to my core. I still want to make that difference. But I think what I foresaw is where I am, which is when I can show that I can stand toe to toe and execute and win in business as good as anyone in the world, then I've earned the right to speak about perhaps a better way to do it. But at that time, it just was, kick ass and do whatever I have to do at my current job, which was a ton of work, a lot of travel, a lot of late nights and weekends, but just trying to, but I loved it. It was fascinating. It was interesting. And just, I generally encourage people, look, do good work and the rest will take care of itself,
So after working at International Paper, for how long did you work?
I was there for 2 years in Memphis and then moved with my then wife to El Salvador and was there for 5 years.
Wow. So what was the next step after that?
So when we had moved to El Salvador, I became a general manager of a small business and eventually wound up running the whole region of Latin America for a couple divisions. And what I started to think about then is, I think that's when I really started to think about a career, like, okay, this job and that job and where do I go? And I was fortunate to be on sort of an executive path with International Paper. I was, for my age group and sort of position was, sort of an up and comer in a way. And so, I was talking to senior executives about different moves I might make, and I sort of thought, hey, you know what, maybe I could have a shot at either playing a very senior role in a big company like this or even running it someday. And so I was debating moving to Brazil and taking on a management role there. I was actually considering moving to Europe and running human resources for $1 billion business there, which I really understood how powerful that function can be. But I had a couple concerns. One was all roads led back to Memphis. And my wife and I lived in Memphis. We loved Memphis, but we didn't want to settle there. We had family on the East Coast. We wanted to travel around. And the other was International Paper was great to me. They're a great company, but I wanted something different. Paper and packaging wasn't what was most exciting to me. And I realized that, if I was going to jump ship and go to another company, that the job I was really trained to do, I still had a limited view then. I now have a very different view about these things. But at the time, I felt like, the only job I'm going to get is running a division of Latin America for some U.S. multinational. And that means I'm living in Miami, traveling 150 days a year, and I didn't want to do that. And that's when I started to think about becoming an entrepreneur. And I actually made the decision I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just needed to find a business.
Right. And so was there an aha moment or like some like specific moment that you can point to, like that's where I came up with Zico? Like that's... Yeah.
I'll tell you, first it was the mindset, and I did write about this in my book, High Hanging Fruit, is, I'll never forget the scene where I'm with a friend of mine, a colleague in Miami, actually, at a bar after a long night. And at some point he asked me, he said, Mark, do you ever think you're going to leave International Paper and start your own business? And I said, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I'm really I've never been the guy with the idea, so maybe I'll, go join somebody that has the idea and I'll be the one to run it, or maybe I can help take a business from $1 million to 10 million or 10 million to 100. I think I'm more of an operator than an entrepreneur. And this guy looks across me at the eye like I'm just, being an idiot and says, Mark, the only difference between you and an entrepreneur is an idea. And you're as capable of anyone as coming up with an idea. That was like an aha moment, And then a couple months, weeks probably later, I was with some colleagues of mine from Latin America that I was on. They were on my board of directors. I was on the board of directors of one of their companies. And a couple of these guys, a little bit older than me, a good bit older than me, at some point pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Mark, we know you're going to leave IP someday and do your own thing. We just want you to know we'd love to hear about it and would be interested in investing." And that was another one of those confidence boosters that I needed, I think, to get myself comfortable. And so I started to dive in and just brainstorm ideas and had lists and lists and lists and lists of ideas. And I would bring them home to my wife or kind of share them with my wife, and we'd talk about them, joke about them. And, you know, she was really good at saying, why would we do that? That doesn't make sense. And so it wasn't until I really put together a list of criteria, you know, what am I looking for? How am I going to know a good idea when I see it? And so I developed a series of screens that really helped me put these ideas against. And coconut water was on the list. We had drank it all the time at the beach. People would come down. It was a curiosity. They would love it. It was a great hangover cure. If you're ever sick, it was, you know, something to drink for rehydration. But it was actually when I realized at some point, because I was sort of in the beverage industry and just reading about different crops and different things, when I learned that the coconut industry was massive around the world, but was all built for the oil and the meat, and that the water was literally thrown down the drain.
Wow.
That was my aha moment to realize, oh my God, we could build this massive, healthy beverage category that's also sustainable because we never have to plant another tree.
Yeah. In your book, I read your book a few years ago, and it was definitely, I loved it, and it definitely inspired me a lot in terms of like thinking about like that quote that you said, like the only difference between you and an entrepreneur is an idea.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. I think that's really an interesting, just something really interesting. But something else I thought which was really interesting was how you said that in building a business, you do it by not sacrificing marriages, families, friendships, passions, and values for business success. How has that helped you in when you were building Zico and now in your business ventures now?
Yeah, great question. So I believe that more than ever, and I'll tell you, I've actually flipped it completely on its head in a way that I think is fascinating. But look, at the time, it was tough, you know. Because look, in our society, I think it's very difficult. Nobody talks about the person that, you know, started a business, did okay, but is happily married and has a couple kids, and, you know, is a good person and community member, right? Like, why don't we celebrate that, right? We're obsessed with success and breakout and celebrity and money and all these things. And look, it is what it is. You know, there's no reason to judge it. It just is. That being said, it's hard. It's hard as particularly a young man, I think, in this world. Women have equal and different challenges in some ways, but to feel like, God, I got to make it. I got to be something. And boy, that puts a lot of pressure on a relationship. And it can put a lot of pressure on friendships. Do you go into business with your friends or not? Do you take money from your friends or not? What if your friends, you know, aren't so supportive of your idea? What if your significant other, girlfriend, you know, boyfriend, family, you know, aren't supportive? I had some, you know, difficult times on, hey man, I gotta be gone for the weekend. I gotta work events. I gotta do stuff. How do you balance that? And by the time we launched Zico, we had 2 young girls, right? You know, how do they factor in? And boy, I certainly didn't get it perfect. But what I, thank God, came to terms with early on is, if the business succeeds and I fail at my marriage and I fail as a father, that's a loss. In my book, that's a loss. I could have all the money in the world. That's not the life I want. If I have a great relationship, if I'm a great father, if I, you know, can still, you know, look my family in the eye and friends and say I've been there for them, and the business fails, I can live with that. And once I got that prioritization clear, it helped. Now I had to come back to it all the time and remember and, you know, rub and, you know, figure out what that means and the reality of a day-to-day scramble. But I kept that pretty clear. And so, you know, for the 9 years of Zico, I took vacation all the time. Now I was working some of it, no doubt.
Right.
I took weekends with my girls. I had, dinner with them. I worked my ass off, and I did a lot of nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of travel. But I figured out how to build them in. But what was interesting is I came to see that also forced prioritization, right? That forced me to understand what really matters. What are the 3 or 4 things I got to get done today? I got to get done this week. I got to get done this month. What are the things that are going to move the needle? Because I don't have time for BS. And so it allowed me to really prioritize. And I'm sure I pissed off some vendors and some partners, some people that wanted to work with me. I probably wasn't always as patient and understanding as I could have been with employees and partners and others. But I was on a little bit of a mission to both build the business and keep my life. I can tell you how that's changed a little bit today.
Yeah. So today, I know that you've started Power Plant Ventures. How has that been different or similar from building Zico?
Yeah, great question. It's a lot of similarities, but fundamentally very different. So the similarities are that, and what I did even a little better this time was, really spend some time on the vision, on the mission. Where are we going? What are we doing? On values. I choicefully chose, I chose intentionally to have partners. I did not have any. I had investors, I had amazing employees, but I didn't truly have a partner in Zico. Mora, my wife, was very involved, but not sort of a day-to-day equity partner. And I knew I wanted to work with partners. The research shows that typically speaking, co-founded businesses are more successful. In the fund world, it is almost always co-founders or multiple founders that are most successful. And there's a reason for complementary skill sets, different points of view. And so I found in my first 2 partners, and ultimately a 3rd partner we brought in, smart, capable, successful people, but that also thought very differently from me, right? So I went in with that same sort of attitude. Where it becomes different is it's a totally different business, right? It's radically different. So I had to learn this industry. How does it operate? What matters? How do you run a fund? How do you think about that? How do you raise money? How do you structure that? What are the legal implications? So that was a very, very steep learning curve that I'm still on 5 years later.
Awesome. So we end off these podcasts by asking a pretty simple question, but we also think it's pretty deep. So you've done so much. It's very clear that you've definitely innovated in so many different fields. What is something you'd like to be remembered for?
Wow. I would like to be remembered for helping to redefine what it means to be successful in business. I would like, particularly around our engagement with the environment, I would like to be remembered as being part of the solution about how businesses became part of the solution to reverse global warming forever. And in the process, rebuilt a business model that's more regenerative.
Awesome. So you want to say,
No, so we, as like a little tribute to our we got this idea in Spanish class at school to start the podcast. So it was a little tribute to our Spanish teacher. We always end these off by saying, adios, senor. We count it down and then we say adios, senor. So, Alex, you want to count down?
Yeah, for sure. All right.
3,
2, 1.
Adios, senor.
Adios, senor.
Adios, señores.